was a decision made to pivot and it didn't go according to plan. What's that like?
It's extremely tense. It's extremely tense. I mean,
today on Making It a Manufacturing podcast, I'm joined by Preben Henning. Welcome, Preben, to the podcast. Could you give our listeners a quick snapshot to Xelia Pharmaceuticals?
Xelia is a company who are changing the tires while the car is running. We have more than 120 years history in doing anti-infectives. Hospitals, doctors, they depend on this medicine. If you cannot supply reliably anti-infectives to hospitals, you cannot run a hospital.
What did the military teach you and how has it shaped you into the leader you are today?
What I learned from those years were that I have a big heart for customer service, and now the feeling of handing over medicine to real people. When did it really hurt? When was it really difficult? When did I really have to pull myself together? At one point in time, I was responsible for supplying global critical medicine and were hit by some unknowns, and suddenly we found ourselves in a situation where we couldn't supply.
Personally, how does that impact you?
It meant sleepless nights, many sleepless nights.
Throughout that journey, you actually went on to produce and supply Novo Nordisk's first product in the US. What was that like? What are the biggest challenges? How critical is your leadership?
Whew, that's a big one. That's a big question. It meant everything. When I came there, it was not even a thought that could we actually make a global launch out of our US facility. And then it was decided that we were going to both produce and launch Saxenda, the predecessor to Ozempic, out of the US. But, you know,
today on Making It a Manufacturing podcast, I'm joined by Preben Henning. Preben is currently a board member at Xelia Pharmaceuticals, has 25 years of global leadership ranging across Denmark, the US, Brazil and China, has experience starting from sales to finance and site leadership and now the boardroom. We will dive into the challenges of scaling manufacturing sites and all the lessons learned throughout that process. So welcome, Preben, to the podcast.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today. To start with, could you give our listeners a quick snapshot to Xelia Pharmaceuticals and your role on the board?
Yes, I can certainly. So Xelia Pharmaceutical is a very old company based out of Denmark. We have more than 120 years history in doing anti-infectives. So this is basically what the company is about. And so in one hand, it's very old products, but in the other hand, critically important for hospitals, doctors, and end of the day, patients. Xelia is a global player, has a global network, facilities in Denmark, but also in China and in Hungary. And the role of the board and where I play, that is really to secure that Xelia has the best possible and the right strategy to actually secure and bring anti-infectives to patients globally.
Amazing. And I'm going to dive straight into technical questions and getting your operational experience. From your perspective, sitting on the board, what are the biggest challenges operationally or engineering challenges to scaling Xelia's manufacturing sites?
The biggest challenges to me is to be truly aware of that scaling anti-infectives is a complicated matter because we talk about aseptic manufacturing, sterile manufacturing. We talk about very tight tolerances for what we do. We talk about medicine. So have that under your skin requires a lot of engineering, a lot of customization to the processes Xelia master, and then do that and do it globally is something you need to be very, very humble about. And then you also need to be aware that hospitals, doctors, they depend on this medicine. If you cannot supply reliably anti-infectives to hospitals, you cannot run a hospital. And if patients do not have access to this medicine, it could become lethal. Any infection you can imagine could become lethal if you cannot treat it. So having that awareness when you then scale, because you have to secure reliable supply, combined with that you both upgrade and you expand your capacity. Those are the big challenges. So you could say Celia is a company, like many other pharmaceutical companies, who are, you could say, changing the tires while the car is running. That's basically how it is. And you're changing it, and you also want it to become and be able to run faster, smoother, more safe. So that is the reality, and that is why this is not in any shape or form trivial. And that then boils down to what it's all about: people. That you have the right subject matter expert, you have the experts, the process, the deep process knowledge, so you can actually perform this job. Mm.
And is there a time over the past, I guess, 3-4 years when you've been involved, is there a decision or a project where you've had to strategically come together and pivot or make a decision that has had a real impact on patients due to that challenges of operationally sort of scaling?
Absolutely, yes. And if I should point to something, then Celia has actually had a quite significant strategy change. Mm-hmm. So Celia, for a time period, wanted to move from be a business to business operation now, and then include business to industry. So they actually wanted to take their hands around a bigger part of the value chain. We have to admit it was not successful, and that strategy was changed quite recently. So now Celia is moving back to the core, what the company used to be, a business to business operation, which we can now see is really successful. Success being that you are a profitable company that we start to see now. And that also means we are moving into, you could say, a sustainable business. And that sustainability will also impact patients, because then we become more reliable. It's not reliable to run a business if you don't make a profit. And that's the thing about the business Celia is in. Very old business, critical medicine, but the profit on these old products are very, very small. The margins are very small. And that means that Celia is under a huge competitive pressure from players in China, in India, and so on. And therefore it's lethal if Celia is not able to actually run a sustainable and profitable operation. Yeah.
When there was a decision made to pivot and it didn't go according to plan.
Yeah.
What's that like in terms of sitting on a board and you're in a meeting room and decisions you've made?
Yeah.
It's tense. Can you share a bit of light into that?
It's extremely tense. I mean, no one feel comfortable in being in a business environment where you basically do not run a sustainable business. So yes, it is tense, and this is also why a strong board lives from senior people with senior experience, having been in this kind of setting environment before, so they don't panic, and actually can stay in this and can keep calm in this and can by being in this open and transparently make sure that the needed changes are made. So the ship can turn direction and get safely into harbor. So I think that this is you are spot on. I mean, it's not nice, but it's really nice when you then start seeing that decisions made are actually pulling the business in the right direction. And this, and I just have to applaud the local management, because the CEO and the management team and the organization, they are the people who are making this. It's not in the boardroom this happens. It happens in the operation.
That's a point I was going to ask on. How critical is your leadership when these moments happen and you have to pivot and you need to make changes to the business. That first, second, third leadership pillar becomes so important to keeping everyone, the whole business, calm.
Yes.
This is how we're going to handle the situation, and this is the steps we're going to take to improve the situation.
Yes, and that job resides with the CEO and the management team to make that happen. It's not out of the boardroom that happens, which is also something you need to, if you like me, when you come out of an operational background, you need to relearn a lot of things here, because I naturally would have a tendency to be pulled into and wanting to be part of that the more operational side of this, but that's not your role as a board member. So you need to relearn that.
No, amazing insights. Looking at where it all started for you at the start of your career, you didn't have the most traditional roots, I would say, into the life science industry. Can you share with us a bit around the start and your route?
Yeah. You are spot on. I mean, it has not been a straight line for me getting to where I am today. But it's interesting. When I look back, I can connect the dots, but I maybe couldn't when I was in it. And I have an engineering background, but before getting into pharmaceutical, I had a tenure in the army. And that was very meaningful for me because that was where I got my first touch with leadership, management, and where I basically learned the basic stuff. And also where I come to acknowledge that I found a lot of energy in interacting, leading people. So that was something which early on was something I really thought, okay, here I can make a difference. This is something I would keep exploring. I moved from the army into sales, and I also came to realize that I was actually quite good at it. And it's not to brag, but it was just, it pulled some. It made me aware of some of my strengths, and I really, what I learned from those years were that I have a big heart for customer service. I mean, and later on being serving patients, and I also from there learned a lot about what it takes to make the entire chain successful, and then I moved from there into finance, and so really some different jobs here. And in that role, I learned a lot about decision making and decision processes and resource allocation, and actually how do you truly, make your strategy come alive, and combining all that for me was then logic to go into manufacturing, because the patient perspective, the customer centric perspective. The knowledge about resourcing, resource allocating, the knowledge about how do you make strategy come alive. And then what really, really gives me a lot of energy, the feeling of a strong purpose, contributing, handing over medicine to real people. That was why I decided to stay in manufacturing. And everything I have tried before that just to me have enlightened me in terms of the perspective I have on manufacturing and what I know and what I feel about manufacturing. So that's the long story, and no, not a straight line, but to me,
I really like how it started with human.
Yes,
and I think ultimately you've ended up in a position where every decision and everything you do is about improving the human health.
Yes.
So in terms, yes, it wasn't straight, but it has been aligned, I suppose, from that purpose point of view. What did the military teach you, and how has it shaped you into the leader you are today?
Yeah, I'm quite certain that my history in the army has formed me a lot as a leader, and what I can see is that my take on what is required to build a strong fellowship, which is needed because it is the organization, the people who are doing the job, and you need to ensure they have sparkling eyes when they do it, and they do their best. And I learned a lot from being in the army about that, because in the army you are at war, right? I even were serving as a UN soldier at some point in time, and there I really learned the importance of being extremely focused and good at understanding the situation and conveying that to people, because everyone needs to understand the context they are in, also from a purpose point of view. I learned very much, and which sticks with me, the critical importance of that you truly understand the task, the mission you are on. It cannot be underestimated. I almost feel like if you understand the task and the mission, it's not that you are already done, but you are more than half done. And then, of course, it's about communication, being able to convey that to people. And then it needs to, any day, it needs to be condensed into actions. You need to do something. And that's what you also learn in the military, that it needs to end up that you actually, you defend or you attack, or what do you do? And very importantly also, that you are aware of the results and you debrief, that you actually have learning loops around what's about. Though that kind of thinking sits with me. I learned it in the army, and I'm building on it every day. That's how I lead and think.
I think it resonates with me quite a lot in terms of business, in terms of anyone who's worked in a startup or trying to build something from scratch.
Yeah.
Having a vision,
yeah,
and understanding the mission and what you're meant to do.
Yeah.
It could be a group of 3 or 10 people.
Yes.
A lot of startups fail because they chop and change what they're trying to do or how they're trying to do it. And it sounds like the army taught you very early on. Nail that bit there. And as you said, you're halfway already.
Yes.
To the goal, which I think is
and then hold the line. Hold the line when you and of course you need to be able to. Sometimes you need to. I mean, of course you need to change along the way. Yeah. You have to need to adapt, but you also need to be very respectful. That stay on the course. Mm-hmm.
Were there any principles that you learnt back then that you still use today in leadership? And it could be how you deal with people, or
I think what you learn early in the army is resilience is a given. You need to have that, and that also goes for business. I mean, resilience is and discipline is also key, and discipline for some can maybe sound as a negative thing, but to me it's not. It's also through discipline, it can also give you the room for actually some calmness and ability to reflect. So I think those were some of the things you really learn. I mean, if you when you move into a forest and you need to set up your camp and so on, the discipline around doing this, that you don't have to figure out every time how you do it. And now we are back to standard work, right? Those elements is actually a help for you. So that's what I mean about discipline. And I think that kind of logic sits with me.
Was there ever a project that you've worked on that was close to failing, or that sparks memory that you've had to? Yeah,
I can promise you, I have been part of a lot of projects which both failed or were close to failure. You cannot go through more than 25 years in a company and in a growth company living from innovation without, hit the wall a lot of times. And so yes, clearly yes. And if I should share an example with you, so when did it really hurt? When was it really difficult? when did I really have to pull myself together to stay on this job and make it. Then I would say one example I have is at one point in time, I was responsible for supplying global critical medicine, and we had to do a footprint change, move one tech transfers to a new facility. A lot of technicalities here, but were hit by some unknowns, and suddenly we found ourselves in a situation where we couldn't supply. And with my patient-centric perspective, and the fact knowing that we are not living up to the commitment we have given patients, that is the most awful thing I have ever tried in my career, I can promise you. I found myself, I still have this very clear picture, standing in an auditorium in Japan, confronting more than 300 doctors, and had to excuse that the medicine we had promised them, we couldn't supply. So they had to go back and find alternatives for kids being on this treatment. Absolutely something you don't want anyone to try. So that was awful. But what I also learned and what I also saw, that situation, it was an emergency, you could say, really made the organization to pull together, really pull together. And a lot of innovation brought to the table very fast, implemented, and so on. And yes, we had a time period where we were in stockout, but we came back, and we came back stronger. And today, plenty of supply. And if you read the quarterly announcement, you will see the business is thriving now. But it's just to say to you, this was, it required heavy lifting like I have never tried before. And that was painful.
Personally, how does that impact you?
It meant sleepless nights, many sleepless nights. And when you start having sleepless nights, it also impact your cognitive capacity. So it actually means that you become a less strong version of yourself, and it forces you to rely on other people because you are not performing as you should. So that's some of the consequences, and that is where you learn. But I will also say you don't have to get so much out of your comfort zone to learn. There are more effective ways to learn.
Yeah. You don't need to go to an extreme.
Yes,
I think it's a great reminder, I think, to everyone who works within manufacturing and who's on a site pushing products out on a daily basis that their job is so important and they have such a big impact. And I think a lot of businesses who remind their staff of this and share stories, success stories with them, are the ones where you build that culture of pride and you can get the extra 1% out of everybody. Because I think it's quite easy in manufacturing to forget
exactly
what you do.
I think you were spot on there, and it's funny because I just actually went to a board meeting yesterday, and the chairman we have this section where manufacturing operation provide insights and feedback and status, and as things were running very smoothly, the chairman, which I really enjoy, by the way, really did not wanted to spend so much time on it. And that is exactly the dynamic you are pointing at here, that in manufacturing, you are a success when there's no noise. And that means that you can feel that you are being forgotten. And it's really up to the management to safeguard that cannot happen. Because, end of the day, we are the products we deliver, period. Everything else is important, but with no products, forget about it. That's what the patients, they live from. So it's an ironic thing, this, that manufacturing can be forgotten because the company is the products they sell.
Yeah, it's an amazing point. I often think a lot of the scientists, the R&D, they're the ones that typically get
Yes.
the acknowledges from it. But yeah.
and you learn it every day. I mean, where you have brilliant compounds, molecules being potentially delivered to patients, but if you forget to
How we got there.
in due time to safeguard the capacity, safeguard the build of the proper organization, safeguard that the knowledge in how to replicate this, what is it worth?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, no, nice. And obviously that was a more of a challenging
Yes.
project and a memory.
Yeah.
Is there a project you're most proud of? That it could be for different reasons. It may be the savior of that project, but
I carry a lot of pride when I look at what the organizations I have been part of have achieved. I have to say, and I could, and there are luckily many more successes, and one funny one success I find funny and also maybe ironic and also worth to learn from. If I should mention one, that is actually, if you look at nowadays the success of GLP-1, I mean the support and help to obesity globally, then I had the pleasure of being part of when all this started, and you know, the entire obesity market has taken everyone by surprise. No one could see what this would become. And that also meant back then when we installed, I mean, the first filling line, we installed the first assembly and packaging line, the capacity was not close to being adequate. And despite that, the forecast we were looking at, they were still not in any shape or form reflecting the reality we are seeing today. And I have this funny event where my head of a specific factory, he kept raising his hand at our weekly meetings and say, I mean, the orders are just hitting us like we have not seen before. But, you know, in the forecast planning and so on, we couldn't see it. So, and that would normally be your trigger for making a business case, doing the proper investment and so on. But given this, this guy keep pushing, we ended up saying, okay, we cannot justify this, but we better expand capacity. So we ordered equipment, we got it qualified, and you know, I mean, we were following it minute to minute because we were behind, and we just needed that extra capacity. And I found that it's just a funny reflection about it. It felt like an enormous success, and when I look back, it was, because it was creating the foundation for what everybody talks about today. But it was not in any form made out of this kind of linear strategic plan and everything lined up and things were ordered. That was not what it was. It was chaotic, and it was about moving fast.
sometimes that is how success happens, right?
Exactly.
It's unplanned.
Exactly. It was not planned.
Yeah.
It was unplanned.
Yeah. No, we will dive into your time at Novo Nordisk
Yeah.
In a little bit, and we'll definitely touch on GLP-1 and that area. With your international exposure, I wanted to dive into a few of your experiences around the world.
Yeah.
You've had time in Denmark, Brazil, China, France. Have I missed any?
Oh, it's okay. It's okay.
Long list.
I've had time everywhere, but in different shape or form. But it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Out of all of them international assignments, what do you look back on as the fondest? Or
Yeah, that's a great question because you almost ask me which one of my children do I like the most, right? And I cannot answer that, and that's honestly how I feel about the international part of my career, and having to answer, I will say a big highlight for me is when I think back about my years working in North Carolina in the U.S. And the situation back then was that we had a US side which was struggling. It was really struggling. We had a president for the US who were not in any shape or form impressed or satisfied with the service level coming out of this side. We had low morale. We had people. We had disengaged, a lot of disengaged employees, and we had a site which were not really up to snuff, I have to say. And I was given that responsibility to try to change. And looking back, we managed. The organization in US, they managed really well. And it was all about leadership. It was all about culture. It was all about getting the right leaders in place, and it was all about ensuring that people, they felt engaged, cared for, that they were involved, they had a voice, that they were able to contribute, that we got some openness and transparency of what are the true problems, how do we fix them, because the business we have in US is the most. Any patient is important, but it is of significant importance. So being able to be part of such a turnaround, to me, is something very, very unique. And again, when I think back, I don't remember the results, to be honest, but I remember the people. I remember how people, they greeted you in the hallway when you went on your daily line walks. The handshakes and so on, and the sparkling eyes. That's what I remember from my time there, and that is exactly, and that goes hand in hand with great business results. And then you get things go moving, and then suddenly the expansions, the challenging targets and so on, they become healthy challenges, something you would like to stretch yourself to reach, and not like a burden or something. So that's why it has a unique place in my heart, I will say, that time period.
So going there on day one, or the first 30 days of assessing the facility and it not being where it needed to get to. Yeah. What type of conversations are you having with the current leadership there on site? Yeah. And how do you progress that?
Yeah, and you're spot on, because that is exactly what I did and what I would do in any situation like that. That is, the first phase is exactly about dialogue, conversation, openness, being extremely humble, and it's not something you can play. It's something you are. You have to, because otherwise you will not succeed. So you need to be humble to the situation, and those were exactly the first days. To me, was all about talking to my direct reports and start creating a picture of, where can I see things are stemming from. Where, and of course, upon that, you have to make changes. And I also back then realized there were people in the wrong positions, and that's a part of it. But if you have to come across that to actually get out on the other side, and sometimes you have to lay off people, but sometimes you also, it's just better to replace and so on. So, but it's just how it is. And the harm done by not doing it is lethal.
And throughout that journey, you actually went on to produce and supply Novo Nordisk's first product in the US for the first time. Yeah. That's a special moment for a business, and for it to be a turnaround, like you'd done. Yeah. What did that mean?
It meant everything. So what we did was that, so we came from this situation where lacking trust to the organization, also from headquarters, other key stakeholders. So of course that also impacted decisions made. And when I came there, it was not even a thought that could we actually make a global launch of a key product out of our US facility? And then when you start delivering and you start build trust, then suddenly you are part of the equation with these decisions are being made. And then it was decided that we were going to actually both produce and launch Saxenda out of the US, which back then, the predecessor to Ozempic. And everybody knows about Ozempic, but Saxenda was actually laying the groundwork for Ozempic together with Victoza. And that was launched out of this site. And for the organization, everyone can see this. So this is, you can say it, and you can agree that we are good, but this is actually what it means in real life, in real actions. That is, okay, you are the ones who are going to launch this, and that is without comparison the strongest applause you can get.
How early on into your journey was that decision made? Because when I think of, if we go back to the start of everyone from your army days, agreeing a vision, getting everyone on the same page, communicating that. Was it ever outlined and spoken about to the whole site that this is what we're going to do, and you could bring everyone to it? Or was it a success that was a surprise, potentially?
I remember, I think that the truth is in between. So I think, I can't remember in details, but I have the feeling that when I look back, that as we really started seeing results being gained, right? Then immediately triggered discussions about next expansion, next launch, next product, so on. Then suddenly US is on the table, and 1.5 years before, it was not even considered. So I think this is an evolution, easy evolution. And then suddenly it's a part of, and then of course we do it out of US. It makes sense, and
No, amazing. And I guess the US presence is pretty big now in terms of what they're doing. So it's
absolutely So they have just kept. I mean, so that was just I just had the joy. Being part of that journey for 3 years, and then they have kept going ever since. I mean, so they are just killing it. I mean,
No, amazing. And one country and one assignment I wanted to touch on was your time in China.
Yes.
How was that personally and professionally, moving to Asia?
Yeah, it was a life-changing. It was a life-changing experience, and if there's anyone of the listeners who are considering if they want to go abroad, I can just say do it. I mean, do it. And that was my first assignment abroad, going to China, and it was about. It was actually literally about a greenfield situation. I mean, we had an empty factory, and this was of critical importance to get this up running, because it also played a key role in market access when it comes to reaching out to Chinese diabetics. So it was actually about laying the groundwork for Novo Nordisk to be even more successful in a fast-growing, important market, and it was for me and for my family a cultural shock. I mean, we couldn't read the signs, we couldn't speak to anyone. I mean, so it was just difficult, and for a European to come to China back then. There was also, I have to say, a lot of skepticism in Europe about China. I mean, quality was of a big concern. So suddenly being in the driver's seat of producing medical devices, very, very small tolerances, I mean, so on and so forth, and then doing it out of China, it was not an easy sell, and that also meant. Internally, I felt I had to struggle and make a lot of argumentation to sometimes get the support I needed, and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, what I learned, and back to meeting a culture and a country with humbleness and openness, I was just blown away, and I did not know what to expect, but what I met in the Chinese culture among the Chinese employees, blown away. I mean, it is contagious when you are there to learn how the thinking way is, the work discipline, the actually the feel and sense for what quality looks like, and then knowing the I will say, I mean, the eagerness to wanting to succeed. It's something I have not seen elsewhere, which is also why today, if you look at that side, it is. I think it's fair to say, and I don't think anyone will disagree. It's fair to say they are probably the most successful side, and also the youngest side. So I mean, talk about geopolitical situation, and us in Europe now seeing Chinese electric cars everywhere and so on and so forth. I'm not surprised at all, because the spirit thinking way you find in China is second to none. And yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Whew, that's a big one. That's a big question. But I think it's a cultural element, and I think we maybe tend to forget that we have experienced a closed China, which is just 1/10 of a second in the history of China. China has a long tradition and history, and I just think they have just surpassed now that very short time where they closed themselves to the outside world, and now they have opened up, and now we actually see and learn what China is all about. That's how I see it. So this is a legacy, tradition, culture, historic situation. That's how I see it.
Yeah. And what were some of the challenges, or could you share a story of a challenge you faced?
Oh yes, I mean that I was. Of course, there was a lot of when I look back, a lot of personal things going on. I remember I felt no trust. I felt that I was not trusted as a new general manager by my direct reports. Some of them I felt quite trusted, but also some I didn't. And it took longer compared to what I was used to actually gain that trust. And it also required me to pay much more attention to it and be much more focused and targeted around this. I need for us to succeed together. So I remember we invested a lot of time in each other for me to get literally under the skin of my Chinese report, because I remember also my boss back then, we had a desire from the very beginning. We really wanted this to become a Chinese organization led by Chinese. We did not want it to fly in expat left, right, and center. I remember I invented this rule together with some of my European colleagues that we did not want it to have more than one European per 100 Chinese employees. So that was the rule of thumb we went along with, because we kept saying to each other, we can find this locally. We can find this locally. We can find this capability locally. And that we just we hold on to that. And I honestly believe we were successful also because of this. So back to your question. I invested a lot in building the trust, and I had a lot of great help to do that. I believe we succeeded, and I believe that laid the groundwork for why we achieved what we achieved during the 4 years I was there.
Was there anything specific about that assignment in China that you took with you to the US? Am I right in thinking there were...
Yeah, because I started in China and then I moved to the US. I can tell you that everything I experienced, everything I learned and experienced from China was a stepping stone when I moved to the US and took over there. So I am very, very certain that, I took everything and then I added. to it, right? And then but again, the humbleness. I mean, meeting the U.S. organization with extreme humbleness and openness, because I knew the answer was not sitting with me; it was sitting in the organization. We just need to figure out where it was and how to manage it. And that experience I took with me from China, and also talking about the very trust, the relationship in my management team built on trust. That investment in China, I replicated 1-to-1 with my US colleagues, I have to say, and I still remember every individual. I also remember the tears, and I remember everything in the deep conversations we had. But that was what everything was founded upon.
I think it's great because you didn't have a choice in China,
no,
but to be humble.
Yeah,
because you couldn't read, you couldn't speak in their language.
No, exactly.
You had to be vulnerable, and there's a nice thing about that where you didn't have an option, but you had to be raw and humble, and that taught you the best lessons of leadership. And you took that to America, where I think traditionally the US culture maybe isn't as much like that. So, it's great lessons.
And then I will say, and then because you are spot on, but meeting that situation, and now we talked about the military, the discipline. Every day, you get every day. You wake up early and you keep going. In the end, you will succeed.
Yeah. Moving on to news most recently, I guess, with Novo Nordisk, and obviously you've probably got a lot of friends, and still part of touch of the business. So how are you seeing that at the moment? Then the challenges they're facing with the layoffs and things.
It's it is of course very, very painful. I left the company January 1st this year, and I think we were not a week into the year, and then I think things started to from the outside to deteriorate. So I can just say that I fully understand why the changes being made are made, because they are needed to come back. I mean, Novo Nordisk were the leader in this field. They I think it's fair to say they not invented, but they addressed the obesity pandemic, and they had the right solutions for it. And now it seems like competition, whether it's Eli Lilly or whether it's compounders, they are running with it. So of course that is not sustainable. Now we are back to the Celia case. Also, it's not sustainable. Change is needed, and it's happening, and I guess it will continue for a while.
I think it's, as you said, it's needed. But I think from hearing the journey of Novo Nordisk and the experiences you've had, they're a company that can bounce back.
Yes,
they have the right leaders. And you're living proof of that. The journey you've gone with them. This will be 2 steps back, but it'll be 5 forward. In terms of what they're doing. So it's
I truly hope. I truly hope, and and I have not sold my shares yet. So so in action, I'm also believing in it.
Yeah, you need to. So I guess at one point with Novo Nordisk, you were leading a global network of 12 manufacturing sites.
Yes.
Big role.
Yes.
What was that like? Were you on a plane every week?
I have a SAS. They have provided me with a lifetime gold card, so I have free access to lounges the rest of my life because of the mileage I did. Back then. So that is of course true, and as I'm also honestly a very shop floor oriented leader, I have to say I have to see things with my own eyes. That then also requires that you have to get into the plane. So yes, you are right in your hypothesis. And I will also say, especially given the pandemic and COVID-19, what we learned there about there's much more you can do using modern technology in creative, innovative forms. That I also took in. And I will say that helps you on your work-life balance. So you do not end up traveling 300 days a year. So I think it was, when I think back, I think it was quite balanced when I think about it. And but of course, it doesn't come without that you, get on a plane, sure. Yeah.
How challenging is it managing multiple different sites, multiple different cultures, a global network?
How challenging is it? It's first and foremost truly great fun, I will say, because talking about the cultural, talking about you actually provided access to interact with different cultures, different belief systems, and it is a gold mine. And so what my way of approaching this back then was very much steal with pride. I remember we told each other, steal with pride, because what you come to learn when you have access to such a gold mine is that everyone have something to contribute with. And if you can, and that was what we put a lot of effort behind, also with my former management team, this that if you can then establish a system and a culture where you want to learn from each other and you want to build on what is best practice, then you suddenly have a lot of stepping stones which can support you in lifting the totality. And that is, so you can say, was it challenging? Yes, of course it was challenging. It's always challenging. But when you look back, it was really, really great fun because we created a culture, a learning culture, and where people could see it's actually very much about being able to bring in, and I don't have to innovate myself all the time. And sometimes it's me who is the inventor, and others time it's not. So I think this kind of thinking way, operating model, I think we had really, really a lot of fun with. So challenging, yes, but end of the day, really fun.
Mm-hmm. Was there one strategic decision back then that you made which would have had a substantial impact on patients?
I would say all the strategic decisions we took, and they are very often, being materialized into establishment of this new filling plant, establishment of a purchase of this number of lines and so on. They are, to me, they are what the strategy needs to translate into to become more products into the hands of patients. So I have been part of a number of, expansion project, CapEx, billion dollar CapEx programs. So to point to one specific does not really make sense. I think it is in the totality of that Novo Nordisk today can reach many, many, many millions of patients, and that is due to all these, expansions along the way, in my mind.
Yeah. And looking into the future, I know you're very interested in future technologies and,
yes.
And different things. So, in the next 5 to 10 years, what emerging technologies do you think are going to have the biggest impact on manufacturing?
I think, I no doubt that digitalization, automation, connectivity, the use of AI, I believe are the headlines for where manufacturing will develop and is developing, actually. Talking about automation, it's a given, right? We just see more and more AGVs everywhere, cobots. So that's not something we're not even surprised any longer, right? When it comes to digitalization, digital twins and so on, I think there is a lot more to be done in that field. I think there's some platforms which really can deliver in terms of simulation, which can deliver in terms of education, training, and I don't think we have seen. I'm sure we have not seen all of it. And then connectivity. I think is a big theme. That that we get labs and manufacturing and release by exception and all this sensor technology. I mean, so process control and so on. There, I think we have this is gonna really, really change, and it is. And it will become bigger in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think this is the direction the industry is moving in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And from, obviously, AI is the buzzword, and every company is trying to, but it's still a bit unknown.
Yeah.
From robots, AI, digital twins, is any of it, you think, a bit hype? It's not maybe going to have the impact that we're maybe thinking it's going to have when you look into it?
It's a great question, and I think... I sometimes sense today that there can be a fear that AI is going to take over and it's going to be, the intelligence and make the decisions and so on. And that I look at very differently. Also from experience. I mean, in my previous job, we actually some years back, we started our first AI pilot, and that was linked to our 100% visual inspection. So it's about picture recognition. So and we built an AI engine. And in beginning, we thought this is gonna take over basically the inspection process, and by that it will be the critical piece which is gonna safeguard the release of the product. And then we came to learn by working with authorities and so on, you will not be able to go there in any shape or form. So then what we twisted it to become was that the AI engine provided recommendations to the engineers in terms of how can you actually tweak the masks which decides whether a product is good or bad, and through that avoid scrapping good products and make sure that you end of the day only scrap good products. And that was really the problem we were dealing with, that we were scrapping too many good products. So AI suddenly became an fascinating muscle to support the engineers in setting up the machinery in the right way so we got a higher yield. And this is how I interpret what we are going to gain from working with AI. I guess that's also why Microsoft, they call it a co-pilot, right? It's a co-pilot. So it's a co-pilot which supports your decision making, but it's not the one that's going to make the call. We will as human beings. And maybe with quantum computing and so on, we can maybe I'm looking forward to listening to that podcast 10 years from now. Mm-hmm. But I think in the near future, I don't fear. I actually think we will just get even more qualified, faster decisions, get to fail faster. I think AI can help us fail faster so we don't waste time. And thereby we can, reach more, cheaper, better.
Does it scare you a little bit that some businesses may use AI to... They can't do this now, but I could imagine something like this happen in the future. AI could release a batch, and that human part of what you've mentioned of the human people that are checking it, I wouldn't be surprised if we're at a point where the human decision making isn't there anymore. Yeah. In some cases.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I mean, for such a human-centric individual, but also the industry that we're in.
Yeah,
it doesn't sit right with me. No, to be honest, that would happen when we've. Yeah. But
I think we are already dinosaurs in this, right? That's what it shows, right? But I compare it to self-driving cars. We don't see them either, right? Because we still cannot really live with the risk of it going wrong, right? and I think this is exactly what you're pointing to here, and this is why I believe. It will take long time before we pull out that human factor in that decision making, and I think that's the right way to go about it, because there is no problem in involving a human in making the final release stamp, but I think the way up to that decision AI will play a significant and a bigger role.
Definitely. I think looking at a lot of the sort of AVI machines that are being implemented, I think implementing them correctly can obviously save millions in terms of being done right in terms of that automated visual inspection type, especially with syringes and looking at defects and
exactly
things to save millions of things going wrong, which will help.
But from my experience working with AI, actually working with any modern technology, it really exposes how weak. It actually exposes the weaknesses in your processes. So that's another piece of this, that it actually requires a lot from the companies, from the process owners, to even start embarking on applying these technologies, because if it's not very, very, very strictly defined, you cannot use it. I mean, so that's another piece that so I'm not fearful at all, because the AI is not going to take over, because our processes are not even capable of start involving AI in. That was what I also learned from our first pilot.
Yeah, no, amazing. Thank you so much for joining today. It's been brilliant to get your insights into leadership, specific projects, learnings, and my big thing from this is I love that it's all human centric.
Yes.
So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.